The blood-red moons of Antares IV cast an eerie glow across the battlefield, illuminating the scattered remains of what had once been the forward operating base of the 12th Terran Marines. Lieutenant Marcus Thorne dragged himself behind the twisted wreckage of a dropship, his combat armor cracked and systems failing. The neural link to his squad had gone silent hours ago. He was alone. His pulse rifle held only 3 more charges, not enough to hold off a determined Valkyrie warrior, especially not one of the elite Solara caste that had decimated his unit. They were nearly 8 feet tall, with iridescent scaled skin that seemed to absorb energy weapons, and reflexes that made them almost impossible to track with standard targeting systems. Marcus checked his wound. The slash across his thigh had stopped bleeding, but the Valkyrie blade had delivered some kind of toxin that was slowly numbing his leg. Military intel claimed it was designed to keep prey alive but immobilized. The Valkyrie preferred to take prisoners rather than leave corpses. No one knew why. No one who'd been taken had ever returned to explain. A shadow moved in the valley below. Marcus froze, activating his helmet's thermal imaging. The familiar heat signature of a Solara warrior appeared, moving with deliberate precision through the debris. Alone, unusual for their kind who typically hunted in trios. This one was different. Her armor, for the Solara warriors, were predominantly female, another biological quirk that xenobiologists still debated, was adorned with intricate glyphs that marked her as a veteran. A kill leader, the military briefings called them. Marcus weighed his options, 3 shots, 1 warrior. If he could hit a vulnerable joint in her armor, he might survive. If he missed, death would be the merciful outcome. She paused, her elongated head tilting skyward. The crest of spines along her skull flared slightly, a sign of alertness. In one fluid motion, she drew a curved blade from her back, its edge glimmering with the same toxin that was currently working its way through Marcus's system. "Now or never," he whispered, raising the rifle. The Valkyrie warrior spun, impossibly fast, as if she'd heard his words from 50 meters away. Before Marcus could squeeze the trigger, she'd covered half the distance between them, leaping over obstacles with inhuman grace. He fired once, twice, both shots glancing off her armor as she moved in a blur of scaled skin and metal. His third shot caught her in the shoulder, causing her to falter momentarily before she crashed into him, sending them both tumbling across the rocky ground. The rifle skittered away as they grappled. Her strength was overwhelming, but Marcus's training kept him alive for precious seconds as her blade swept dangerously close to his throat. He managed to draw his sidearm, jamming it against a gap in her armor, but her free hand caught his wrist, slowly forcing the weapon away. Their faces were inches apart, her alien features. The vertical pupils, the flared nostrils, the ridge of small horns that crowned her forehead, filled with an intensity that seemed more than just battle rage. Then, impossibly, she spoke, not in the clicking, hissing language of the Valkyrie, but in perfectly accented English. "Your generals lied to you, human, as mine lied to me." Her voice was melodic with an undercurrent of something like sorrow. "We did not strike your colonies first. The Ceres massacre was staged." Marcus stopped struggling, shock freezing him more effectively than any toxin. "My name is Alara," she continued, her grip on his wrist unwavering. "And I can prove everything I say. If you still wish to die for a lie afterward, I will grant you that honor." The blade at his throat eased back just slightly, just enough to represent a choice. Marcus sat cross-legged on the floor of the Valkyrie transport, his wrists bound with a strange, fibrous material that seemed alive. Across from him, Alara cleaned her blade methodically, her vertical pupils occasionally flicking up to study him. The toxin in his system had been neutralized with a counteragent she'd administered, a courtesy he hadn't expected. "Why would our own leaders fabricate a war?" he finally asked, breaking the silence that had persisted since she'd taken him prisoner. 15 billion dead across 17 systems. For what? Alara sheathed her blade. "Resources, power, the void between stars breeds many hungers." She leaned forward. "Your Terran coalition discovered the same rare element deposits we had been harvesting for generations. Rather than negotiate, certain factions on both sides found conflict profitable." The transport shuddered as it entered the thermosphere of a small moon, one not marked on any human star charts Marcus had studied. Through the viewport, he could see massive structures rising from the surface, architectural forms that defied human aesthetic sensibilities. I was at Ceres, Marcus said bitterly. I saw the bodies, children, elders, all slaughtered. You're telling me that was, what, a theatrical production? No, Ilara's voice softened. The dead were real, but they were killed by mercenaries wearing our armor, using our weapons, designed to trigger your species' protective instincts. She produced a small crystalline cube from a compartment in her armor. This contains transmission logs, financial records, genetic samples from the attackers, not Valkyrie. Marcus stared at the cube, conflict raging within him. His entire military career had been dedicated to avenging Ceres, to protecting humanity from the Valkyrie threat. Could it all have been built on deception? Why tell me? Why not kill me like the others? Ilara's crest rippled, a gesture he couldn't interpret. Because you hesitated when you had your shot before I reached you. You aimed for my shoulder, not my head. A warrior with doubt is rare, valuable. The transport landed with a soft thud. Through the viewport, Marcus could see other Valkyrie warriors approaching. He tensed, expecting execution now that they'd reached their destination. They will not harm you, Ilara said, noticing his reaction. You are under my protection as Carsolarii. And that means... It means, she said, standing to her full height, that they recognize my right to claim an enemy warrior who has proven worthy. Something in her tone shifted, carried an undercurrent he couldn't quite identify. Your military would call you a prisoner of war. Our culture has different interpretations of such bonds. As the transport doors opened and the alien air of this unknown moon washed over him, Marcus realized he stood at a crossroads. He could cling to everything he'd believed, everything he'd fought for, or he could step into the unknown, guided by an enemy who might be telling the truth. When Ilara extended her hand to help him up, he took it. The Valkyrie sanctuary moon of Veshtarai had been hidden from human sensors for decades, its atmosphere deliberately seeded with compounds that scattered standard scanning technology. For 3 cycles of the twin moons, Marcus had been given surprising freedom within the confines of Ilara's dwelling, a spiraling structure of living crystal and bioengineered materials that responded to its occupants' needs. He stood now on a balcony overlooking the vast central gathering space, watching Valkyrie of various castes move with purpose below. They were not the mindless killers portrayed in Terran propaganda. They created art, conducted scientific research, raised their young in communal creches. Your thoughts are loud, Ilara said, joining him at the railing. She wore lighter garments now, her combat armor set aside within her quarters. Without it, her form was still imposing, but somehow more graceful, powerful musculature moving beneath iridescent scales that shifted color slightly with her moods. I've been lied to my whole life, Marcus replied. Adjusting takes time. Not your whole life, she corrected. Only about us. The stars still shine truly. The laws of physics remain unchanged. He found himself smiling at her strangely philosophical observation. Their conversations had evolved over these days, moving from tactical information to cultural exchange, and finally to more personal revelations. He had learned that Ilara was considered unusual among her kind, an accomplished warrior who also questioned authority, who studied human literature and art to understand her enemy. I've decoded more of the data crystal, Marcus said. The financial trails lead back to the Arcturus Consortium on our side and something called the Kelvon Dominion on yours. Ilara's scales darkened, anger he'd learned to recognize. The Dominion are traditionalists who believe contact with other species dilutes our purity. They would rather see us fight than trade or cooperate. Same story, different planet, Marcus mused. But we need more than data files to convince either side to stand down. We need irrefutable proof and witnesses from both sides. There is a human prisoner at the northern compound, Ilara said carefully. A scientist, captured 3 lunar cycles ago. She was investigating the same conspiracy before her research vessel was attacked. Marcus straightened. You're just mentioning this now. Because to free her would be to directly challenge the Dominion, Ilara replied. It would mark us both as traitors to our respective kinds. The protection of my rank would no longer shield you. Their eyes met, human and alien, yet the understanding between them transcended species. Over these days, something had shifted. Initially allies of convenience, they had begun to recognize something kindred in each other, a shared sense of justice, of honor, perhaps even more. If we do nothing, billions more die for a lie, Marcus said simply. Alara's hand, four-fingered, scaled, yet warm, covered his on the railing. Then we move tonight. The rescue mission went smoothly until it didn't. They extracted the human scientist, Dr. Evelyn Costa, from her cell using Alara's authority, but an alarm was triggered as they reached the landing pad. 3 Dominion warriors confronted them, their postures aggressive. Words were exchanged in the Valkyrie tongue, too rapid for Marcus to follow. Then, without warning, the lead Dominion warrior lunged at Alara. The fight was brutal and swift. Alara was formidable but outnumbered. When one opponent drove her to her knees, something primal awoke in Marcus. He threw himself into the fray with desperate strength, managing to disable one warrior with his stolen weapon before taking a savage blow to his ribs. As he fell, he saw Alara roar with unexpected fury, her fighting style becoming more ferocious, almost protective. She dispatched the remaining attackers with efficient brutality. When the dust settled, she helped him to his feet, their faces close in the dim light of the landing pad. Something unspoken passed between them, gratitude, respect, and a tentative recognition of deeper emotions neither was ready to name. "Why would you risk yourself?" she asked, voice low. "They would have killed you." "Same reason you didn't kill me on the battlefield," he answered simply. "Some things matter more than what side we're born on." The stolen Valkyrie shuttle skimmed through the asteroid belt that marked the contested border between human and Valkyrie space. In the cramped confines of the vessel, Dr. Costa pored over the combined intelligence they had gathered, her research, Alara's insider knowledge, and the data crystal's contents. "It's worse than we thought," she said, pushing back from the holographic display. "The Arcturus Consortium and Dominion aren't just profiting from the war, they're using it as cover for a joint mining operation in the Helios quadrant. The radiation signatures match perfectly." Marcus exchanged a glance with Alara, who stood in the cockpit doorway. Over the past weeks, their partnership had evolved into something neither had anticipated. Moments of tension had given way to trust, and trust had opened the door to intimacy, tentative at first, both exploring the unfamiliar territory of interspecies connection. What began as curiosity had deepened into genuine affection, and eventually, passion that transcended their biological differences. "The mining operation explains the need for continuous conflict," Alara said. "While our forces are engaged elsewhere, they extract wealth from territories both our peoples consider sacred. We need to broadcast this to both fleets simultaneously," Marcus decided. "There's a communications relay at Proxima Station that could reach everyone at once." "Proxima is heavily guarded by your people," Alara pointed out, "and I cannot exactly walk in unnoticed." Dr. Costa looked between them, her scientific curiosity evident. "Your relationship complicates things politically, but it might be our greatest asset strategically. A human and Valkyrie working together, living proof that coexistence is possible." Marcus felt heat rise to his face. They hadn't discussed defining what had developed between them. In the relative isolation of their mission, they'd been free to explore their connection without labels or judgment. Facing the wider world would change that. "We do what's necessary," Alara said firmly, though Marcus noticed the subtle color shift of her scales, a sign of emotional turbulence he'd grown attuned to. "The truth matters more than our personal concerns." That night, as Dr. Costa slept, Marcus found Alara in the observation bay, her silhouette outlined against the starfield. He joined her, their shoulders touching lightly. "When this is over," he began hesitantly, "what happens to us?" Alara was silent for a long moment. "Among my kind, warriors sometimes form bonds with those who have proven themselves worthy opponents. It is rare, but not without precedent. And among my kind, people sometimes fall in love with those they never expected to," Marcus replied, taking her hand. "Regardless of where they come from." Her eyes, those vertical-pupilled eyes he'd once found alien but now searched with familiarity, met his. "Is that what this is? Your human concept of love?" "I think it might be," he admitted. "Does that frighten you?" "Valkyrie do not frighten easily," she said, but the slight tremor in her voice belied her words. "But we do recognize when something precious is at stake." Their kiss was a bridge between worlds, different anatomies finding harmony, different life experiences converging. Tomorrow would bring danger, perhaps death. But tonight confirmed what they would be fighting for, not just peace between their species, but the possibility of a future where differences became strengths rather than divisions. Alarms blared throughout Proxima Station as Marcus, Ilara, and Dr. Costa fought their way toward the central communications hub. Their plan was simple but desperate: broadcast the evidence to both fleets simultaneously, triggering a ceasefire long enough for the truth to spread. "Security protocols overridden," Dr. Costa announced, her fingers flying across the alien-human hybrid interface they'd constructed. "We have 3 minutes before the system locks us out again." Marcus took up a defensive position at the doorway while Ilara stood guard over the scientist. Through the viewport, they could see both fleets positioned for what military strategists had dubbed the final engagement. Hundreds of ships prepared to inflict catastrophic damage on each other. "Broadcast initiated," Dr. Costa confirmed. "The data packets are transmitting to all vessels." Seconds ticked by with excruciating slowness. Then, one by one, the weapons signatures of the capital ships began powering down. On the communication channels, confusion gave way to outrage as commanders on both sides processed the evidence of manipulation. "It's working," Marcus breathed, allowing himself a moment of hope. The door behind them exploded inward. Through the smoke strode General Vex of the Arcturus Consortium and Archon Thelak of the Dominion, unlikely allies united by greed. "Touching," General Vex sneered, surveying the three of them. A human soldier playing peace negotiator with his alien whore. Ilara snarled, her crest fully extended in threat display. "Our people know the truth now, Thelak. Your power is already crumbling." "Perhaps," the Archon replied, his own crest pulsing with anger. "But we can still ensure you don't live to see the new order." What followed was chaos. Marcus and Ilara moved with the synchronicity of partners who had trained together for years rather than weeks. They protected Dr. Costa while engaging both leaders, their fighting styles complementing each other, his precision and tactical training enhancing her raw power and speed. In the final moments of the confrontation, General Vex aimed a plasma weapon at Marcus. Ilara saw it a fraction of a second before he did. Her choice was immediate and instinctual. She threw herself into the path of the blast, her armor absorbing much but not all of the deadly energy. The battle ended with both conspirators subdued, but at terrible cost. Ilara lay wounded, her breathing labored, scales losing their luster. Marcus cradled her, medical supplies already in hand. "Foolish move," he choked out, applying treatment with shaking hands. "Completely unnecessary risk." "Necessary," she corrected weakly. "You would have died." "So might you," he responded, fear making his voice harsh. Her hand found his face. "Worth it for peace for us." Around them, the station had fallen into an uneasy calm. On the communication channels, representatives from both fleets were calling for a formal ceasefire. The conspiracy exposed, the architects of war captured, the possibility of a different future unfolded before them, complicated, uncertain, but alive with potential. 3 months later, on neutral ground, a terraformed moon designated as the first joint human-Valkyrie settlement, Marcus stood waiting as delegates from both species arrived for the historic peace summit. His new role as liaison between Terran and Valkyrie military forces kept him busy, but today's ceremony held special significance. Ilara approached, her recovery complete, her new ceremonial armor marking her elevated status among her people. Those who bridge worlds were given special honors in Valkyrie culture, he had learned. Just as human culture was slowly adapting to the idea that alien did not mean enemy. "The medical teams have confirmed compatibility," she said without preamble, in the direct manner he'd grown to love. "Our genetic structures can be aligned with minimal modification. Children would be possible if that path interests you." Marcus took her hands in his, a gesture that once would have seemed impossible, now as natural as breathing. Around them, humans and Valkyrie moved with cautious curiosity, millennia of separate evolution now converging in tentative cooperation. "When I couldn't fight anymore, it wasn't just because of what you said," he told her. "It was because something in me recognized something in you. I couldn't name it then." And now, her pupils dilated slightly, a sign of emotional intensity. "Now I know it was the future," he said simply. "Our future, however we choose to build it." As the leaders of both species approached to begin the ceremony, Ilara and Marcus stood together, not as human and Valkyrie, but as harbingers of a new understanding forged in the unlikeliest of places. A battlefield where truth spoke louder than weapons, and where love proved stronger than the forces that would divide them.